then I don't know if he has already moved to New York. Maybe not, but he said that it's his plan.
Now, yeah, let me ask you this, because one of the things I think that all of us, well, everywhere, but particularly in the United States, because we're going to have amplified combustibility throughout the country. And in fact, the fire chiefs of CAL FIRE is part of this cabal as well. And recently, after the fires hit and burned out the town of Paradise here in Butte County, there was a meeting at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco. And they were talking about how there was going to be increased combustibility throughout the United States. There would be fires where generally people did not expect fires in the past because of the heating and, again, the higher electrification in the environment from all of the frequencies, et cetera. But that this would become a worldwide occurrence. And in the climate action plans, many of which I read, and I've read hundreds and hundreds, one of the common threads is increasing heat events in towns where young and older people will succumb to extremely hot weather. But they also say that there will be power outages as a result of the heat events. And what I'm wanting to ask you, Alexandra, are you hearing about any specific plans through the Illuminati of taking down the power and people being murdered and dying because of lack of electricity? Because when we look at the calamity that will happen in areas where Rothschild here in this country, but Rothschild controls the grid, the utility grid, as we see them turning off the power here, AKA because they claim that we're going to be in a high fire atmospheric condition. They call it a red flag warning. They're turning off the power so that those of us in the country, even if we wished to try to douse our homes with water and create a perimeter of additional watering down the ground, et cetera, we wouldn't be able to access it unless we had backup auxiliary generators and ways to get from our wells. Many people here are also adding additional holding tanks so that they can pump up from their wells with backup equipment so they can get to that. But are you hearing that power outages are one of the methods of massive depopulation, Alexandra?
I believe they wanted to kill off you first, and so we are always like 2 years after you, but they have been blocked. If we speak about EMP attack, so the first that I have seen planned EMP on your country, it was in California. It was 1st of October 2013. It was the nuclear attack on Long Beach, California, Long Beach military base, and it was with EMP. And James Woolsey, former CIA, was involved in propaganda or mind control that time. What was interesting, 1st of October 2013, and it was prevented. The last EMP attack that I know of was planned now this day, 21st, when the red moon or blood eclipse. It was announced already 2 months ago, and therefore I have been spreading this information. And again, James Woolsey was involved in this mind control propaganda. And what I would like to ask you, they usually put something like in one false flag, they put something as a preparation for next one. And when the fires, the dew-made fires in California, one of the fires was named Woolsey, and I don't know California so well, so I believed, of course, there is a place called Woolsey, but then
yes, there is.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Okay, because I was thinking, oh, is it something to do with James Woolsey and the
Wow.
planned EMP attack?
Well,
Because
you know, Alexandra, what we're looking at is, because I study and have studied the NASA war document on stopthecrime.net, and there are 8 references throughout that document of the use of an EMP. But we're now seeing that an EMP would not necessarily have to be the cause of a massive power outage, because with the smart meters now, including not only the electric smart meters, but the wireless smart water meters, all that's necessary is for Rothschild to just flip a button and turn off and disconnect certain areas.
That's right.
Based on the claim of sabotage.
Yes.
And they wouldn't necessarily have to hit the entire country at one time, because certainly they want plausible deniability, which is what has happened with the slow kill and the divisiveness and around the methodology of killing us off. But we're looking at documents right now that are talking about the United States has been aware. And I remember reading the book years ago called 1 Second After, and it's a novel, but it talks about what it would be like after the shutdown of a power grid. And so it doesn't need to be a chromal mass ejection. It doesn't need to be necessarily an EMP. It can be what's been happening here already in Northern California, where they're simply turning off the system
And
and blaming it on climate change.
I don't know if you've heard this or not, but Jim found where now they're sneaking into the mainstream media that Putin has a backdoor access to our grid system. So if they do go down, there goes that plausible deniability. They can just blame it on the Russians, like they blame everything else.
Well, that's the reason for creating the illusion of borders. And we're not. It's just an agreement with all of the Luciferic leaders. It's all being run simultaneously. There aren't any borders, and that's what's also so crazy. In order to, of course, keep the war machine going, there had to be the divisiveness created between countries. But I recently talked about Solarin, because back in 2015, when I did that YouTube plan to burn up Northern California, I was reading that Pacific Gas and Electric and California Public Utility Commission email exchange. And at the time when I read it, I was on the Rinse Radio Network, and that was a disclosure I did while I was on with Rinse. And I was reading that email exchange, and I at the time did not understand the enormity of what that meant. And I'll take a look at it right now and read it for everybody that may not have heard this, so that people will understand this is going to affect you, because we've been researching Solarin Group, Solarin Corporation, S-O-L-A-R-E-N, and we reported this on our last Deagle radio show, and it's up on stopthecrime.net. Everyone needs to listen to this video, this YouTube, and it's entitled Fires Worldwide, Space-Based Weapons. And we're talking about the real reason, the story, the backstory of why Pacific Gas and Electric has filed Chapter 11. It has nothing to do with their inability to pay for what they admit to, with not eliminating the foliage, the vegetation around the power lines. That was just a way to distract us from the truth. The truth is that this 106-year-old company run by Rothschild is regrouping under another delivery system of electricity to the planet, to the entire Earth, by using satellites. But we'll talk about that in a minute. But this email exchange, again, that was released by stopthecrime.net back in 2015, reads as follows, and this is from, and it's dated August the 22nd of 2011. And the reason that we got it and were able to discuss it in 2015 is it was a a required download by a law judge because Pacific Gas and Electric had instructed their smart meter coordinator, their director of the PG&E smart meter division, to get into a Google group that we were in against the smart meters to find out and understand what kind of opposition we were creating. So he got caught. And in the discovery aspect of how PG&E was spying, I remember that I was called by the San Francisco Chronicle, asked how I felt with my name being in the documents along with many other people as well. And I said, why would this be a surprise? The smart grid is a spy grid. So I wouldn't expect anything less from Rothschild. But having said that, this email exchange said this, and this was from the California Public Utility Commission, which is supposed to be the body over Pacific Gas and Electric to regulate them. And actually, they are Rothschild as well. So, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes perhaps, but it says from the California Public Utility Commission to Pacific Gas and Electric, it says this: I assume you're assembling a high-level task force of washed up and never were, yet somehow movie star handsome former astronauts to handle PG&E's response to the upcoming damaging space weather. Also, dribble out one at a time over the next few months all internal memos, lawsuits, PowerPoints, presentations, and officer cover-up directives in which PG&E is repeatedly warned about damaging space weather and chooses to do nothing, then has its lawyers blame its customers, aka Earthlings, for any adverse consequences resulting. Now, the subject of this email is called space weather. That is the subject. Now, this is the response, just within 10 minutes or so, from PG&E back to this email I just read. And this is from Brian Cherry of PG&E. He says, just a reminder, we are the first, meaning PG&E, is the first to propose a solar generator in space that will beam RF frequencies down to a receptor site and convert it to DC current. We have changed our receptor site from the Mojave Desert, that's in California, to Sebastopol, which is also in California. And at the time, this was such a unbelievable email exchange. And then, as many of you may know, I was massively targeted, and I was MIA for about over 2 years before I was able to finally come back and investigate and look into all of this further. And we found out that the Solaren, S-O-L-A-R-E-N Corporation, which is in Southern California in Manhattan Beach, is working with PV, who was the CPUC president for many years. PV went to Solaren, and they're creating a space-based satellite solar weapons system, but they claim also to give us worldwide electricity. So I would highly recommend that everybody understand what is occurring. The space-based, or Solaren, it's a space solar-powered system that creates weaponized weather events, the use of beamed lasers. And sadly, we also need to understand what's behind the solar panels. And because here in 2020 in California, all new construction is to have solar panels. Now, as a land developer, and as someone who looks around at the difficulty now of home pricing and interest rates having gone up and a massive shortage of housing, to continually add cost to houses, you have to wonder why. What's behind the requirement to deploy solar panels? Because they are a weapons system. They're all interactive with the Internet of Things. So you can think of our solar panels as becoming more, less efficient. It's also an asset stripping, because as increased solar dimming occurs, which is occurring now, intensifying more and more now, less sunlight, our solar panels, our solar productivity diminishes substantially. And sadly, the engineers that calc out the necessary amount of panels that people need on their homes are not aware of the solar dimming or of the aerosol programs overhead. They just scratch their heads and say, oh, they didn't expect that to be a consequence on reduced solar benefit. But you can think of solar panels like little gas stations. If you had war tanks roving around on the ground, aiming at whatever they aimed at, all of us, they would need to gas up occasionally. Well, think of solar panels as ground-based gas up stations for the weapons system. That's what's happening. So while solar is good and wind is good, what we're told in the World Bank documents, because they are not reliant because of the weather, they're shifting the energy now to space. And we found some documents on the Pacific Gas and Electric website that spells it out pretty succinctly, and I'll take a look at that in a minute. But I want to acquiesce for a moment and have Alexandra talk about this. But then I'll come back and read what PG&E says on their website about this. And they're working in conjunction with Russia, with the United States, with the Department of Energy, with Japan and China and more. And this is a worldwide weapons system in space with multiple satellites.
It's very interesting that you mentioned satellites, because India, I believe India just launched in 2018 7 or 8 satellites, very large satellites, militarized satellites, or for the military, for military monitoring. And I'm wondering if that has to do with any of this that we're talking about.
Well, we have to consider that everything that's overhead is a weapon now because of the militarization of the planet and the attacks on all of us and the intentional pollution and the deterioration that's being intentionally done to everything that's alive. I mean, the oceans are near dead. The coastlines with all of the coral reefs are so impacted now here along the coastline of California. Abalone and other sea products have, we don't have the seasons that we used to. In fact, they've held off abalone collecting now for a few more years. And they're not understanding why. Of course, we know it's radiation from Fukushima, but it's many things. And I'll just say a couple more things, and then I love to have Alexandra come back on this, because we are now seeing buildings that are becoming structurally set upon. Their integrity structurally is failing. We're being recently told that there are 68 high-rises in downtown San Francisco that have weld joint compromises. So in the event of a weaponized earthquake, which they create, those buildings are expected to either come down or certainly be compromised where they will have to be taken down. And this was disclosed on the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle not that long ago. So they had a map of all these buildings, 68 of them, as I said, with the addresses. And we have to look at what is occurring in our environment now as we continue to intensify the electrification, because everything is energy. Every single thing is energy. And when we increase that energy in the environment and we're hitting buildings with it, it's like creating continual small earthquakes. And we're finding failure to our infrastructure, which is intended failure to the infrastructure. But we have many other aspects of what is occurring as well. We have the effects of cesium from Fukushima that is literally eating away the infrastructure, the buildings. And it's really an unbelievable time, I think, that we're all finding ourselves in. Alexandra, what do you know about the infrastructure and what's happening with that? Is there any chatter in the Illuminati world about the use of these technologies to bring down our buildings and our infrastructure?
They are using the weapons all the time, but I believe that because we have exposed it, they cannot use them as much as they would wish. It's what I believe, that they want to have us in their pockets in all kinds of, with money, with their weapons in the space weapons, all of it. But because we are making such a resistance, so they are not able to pull it, like to kill us very quickly, the most of us. And if I may say, before we started, I have talked in 1.5 hours with Dr. Catherine Horton, and she is very interested, as myself, to do a round table with all of us. And DEBORAH is really great to supply with documents. And Catherine and me, we are very interested to do something legally, something really profound.
Well, we've talked before about that, and of course we would have to recognize that the legal system as set up right now is a framework of illegitimacy for us. It is a criminal framework that has been set up to advantage those that are in power, and we know that the attorneys, by and large, are responsible for orchestrating many of the policies that are strangling all of us to death. It's the law firms, it's the lawyers carrying the bar cards that are put in to create protective rulings and statutes and laws and policies. So we don't fare well in court, if at all. Occasionally they'll allow a victory just to continue the illusion and the idea of a court system, but it isn't a court system for us. And I know that there are other types of systems that other people have put information out. I know that in Brussels there was a court system put together by the people for the people, and targeted individuals were speaking out on that. But it has no legal teeth. There is really, at this point, from our research, nowhere to put anybody that we think we can arrest, because all of the police, sheriffs are paid through the corporation, through the demonic controllers, and it's human compromise. People get their paychecks from the very sources of the death policies. And so I think it's really important to collect the information and get YouTubes out on the type of assaults we're facing, because certainly as many have been talking out about their personal attacks with directed energy weapons, it's horrific, it's torturous, it is undeniably one of the most unacknowledged, well, besides many things being unacknowledged, sex, etc. It's one of a very brutal, unacknowledged reality that we face. And in fact, I don't know if you've had an opportunity, Alexandra, to take a look at this YouTube that we posted just a few days ago. Actually, one of the better presentations about being targeted, and it's on stopthecrime.net, and I am looking for the name. It is put up by a doctor, and I would highly recommend that everybody watch this, because I think it's beautifully illustrated and certainly shows the targeting and how it occurs. It is called No Touch Microwave Torture. by electronic harassment. No-touch microwave torture. Go to stopthecrime.net. It's right next to the other YouTube we just posted about sex and death for profits. And understand the enormity of what we face. And that's why I said in the beginning, we have to band together, I think, as what we're doing, exposing much of this. Now, Alexandra, I know that a lot of people ask me, what do we mean by false flags? Because there's nothing really false about a lot of the things that are planned, but it's just that sometimes they don't go through with these attacks to target or to take out an area. So what would be your best definition from your understanding of what a false flag means? And I'm wondering if we should consider a name change to that.
Well, as Ole Dammegård has explained, or other people also, that a long time ago, that when the bad guys wanted to attack somebody, they put their flag on their ship, one of their ships, and pretended like, so how it started that the own government kill own people, and it's false flag.
Oh, okay. Well, I think that's a good explanation. Quite frankly, I had not understood it like that before, and I find that to be interesting. So I guess another way to say it too would be false flags means attacking in disguise, because we saw that here in Northern California during the fires in October of 2017. There was one small area where one single person did not evacuate that horrific night. And a day or so later, a few more residents that lived in this cul-de-sac where there were a grouping of homes managed to get back up there. And they found this lone guy that stayed. Apparently he was a firefighter. And there was a big, there was writing on the side, on the street. It said, "Looters will be shot." And what occurred in the within the first 3 days of the fires up here were just dozens and dozens and dozens of looters running through the streets around peripheral of the fires, going into homes and stealing things. And this group was literally chasing these looters out of the homes with shovels. And so what we now know is that there are ghost cells, there are ghost armies. So when they plan an attack, then they send in the boots on the ground to traumatize and create more terror. And that's what we now face as well, another level of the assaults that we're all experiencing.
Well, I would call the media parts of that as well, because they further terrorize and blow everything out of proportion and send it out to the masses.
Oh,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
And I also, to go back to false flag definition that I say is it could be a real event, but how it happened and why it happened is misrepresented.
Yeah.
So so 9/11, in my opinion, was a false flag. How it happened and why it happened has been misrepresented. So.
Oh, absolutely. And sadly, with the increased frequencies, which we all, I heard something interesting, and I don't know if you've heard this or not. Ollie Johansson, and at that meeting in Krakow, I hope I'm saying it right, in Poland, while they were talking about some of the health effects from these increased frequencies, they said they're now diagnosing heart cancer. And I had never heard of heart cancer before.
No.
So now we're getting cancer, particularly people that are carrying their cell phones in their pockets.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
So another aspect of death is heart cancer. And it's interesting to note that, of course, the cancer virus was part of an attack mechanism on you know, on, say, example for Cuba and Venezuela, they knew, Castro knew and accused the United States as well as Hugo Chavez that we were trying to kill them with cancer. And in fact, another aspect of weather control for people that are listening and need to understand the reality of this, it goes back so far, many, many, many years. But in the 70s, when we were using Operation Popeye to literally drench Vietnam and rain out the supply lines, the Ho Chi Minh supply line, and just create such mud that they weren't able to move their equipment. At the same time, we were in the embargo with Cuba, and we were embargoing the weather from Cuba. And that was called Operation Nile Blue. And it was a CIA project against Cuba in 1969 through 1970, where we prevented the rain to have an impact on the Cuban sugar crops. And so we held off the rain in Cuba and literally washed out the supply lines during the same time in Vietnam. And here in the California fires, people must understand there are the capabilities to create rain and put out fires, and they choose not to.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
So this is something that everybody has to know. It was a choice to fan these fires, create these fires, and to attack us. So there should no longer be any more questioning around that. In fact, now we've got to move out of kindergarten and advance our thinking into reality, because we are literally being murdered. And for me, and I think all of you too, I don't think extinction of humanity should be an option, but that really does seem to be where we're heading. What do you think?
No, I totally agree with you. Is there any way that this administration doesn't know what's going on?
This administration is complicit. You know that on January 8th of 2018, there was the signing of an executive order to roll out broadband, which is another name for intensifying frequencies throughout the entire country, for there to be accessible frequency connection even in farmhouses. That's one of the words they use in that executive order.
Yes.
Again, this is all part of the PSYOPs. I don't know why there's so many white hats. There's so many people believing that there's a new direction forming through all of that. But sadly it's not. It's again part of our propaganda as we were growing up as children, when the Lone Ranger would come riding in to save the day.
Yeah.
And we are under the illusion that we've got someone that's going to come and save the day.
They want to
And
believe.
so we're sitting there with false hope. I call it hope porn, because it's extremely dangerous.
Yeah.
And we simply must understand the facts.
Yeah.
How would you weigh in on this, Alexandra? Because we're hearing lots of people here in the United States still hoping that the current administration and that voting is going to change things. What would you say about that? Because you're watching our country being absolutely destroyed.
I believe it's dangerous. People try to take what's like to keep the straw or how, but we are on our own. We have to understand that. What I believe about Trump, there are two factions of Illuminati, two main factions. It's the one with William Van Down, which is both of them wants to kill us. Kerry Cassidy has two super soldiers in May 2013. One of them was not a whistleblower. He was sent there by the Illuminati to tell us, to inform us. What he said, that there are two factions of Illuminati. They want to kill us both these factions, but they are in fight with each other. One calls itself the Fourth Reich, and it was on the west coast of United States, and the other one is call itself the Zionists, and they are on East Coast. I believe.
What is that other one on the East Coast,
the
Alexandra?
Zionists. Sorry.
Zionist.
So I believe that he meant that Zionists, it's more like Evelyn Rothschild, and the Fourth Reich is more like William Van Down. And I know that William Van Down wanted to kill Trump several times. It was already before he came in office, so the day before 19th of January 2017, they wanted to do a huge false flag in East Coast. Trump was to take him down, kill him, so that Obama would stay in office, because they gave up Hillary, because it was impossible for Hillary to win any longer. So they gave up, but the strategy the last days before Trump would get in office was to kill him, do huge false flag, and Obama would remain in office. It was prevented. And several times thereafter, this faction wanted to kill Trump. But I believe that Trump, as David Icke says, Trump was $4 billion in debt in the beginning of 1990s, and those who helped him were the Zionists like Rothschild and these people. He owns them, the favor, and then his daughter Ivanka is it's like not Judaism, it's Kabbalistic Satanism. It's not
666.
Yes.
Address.
So as you tell us this, why is it that you think that so many Americans still believe in elections and being able to change things, and believing in a CEO, which is what a president is, a CEO of USA Inc. What would be your explanation as to why so many Americans still pile up at the polling?
I believe it's also psychology. There are people that are brave and want to, like, no matter what, even if it will cost my life, I will do the right thing. And there are people that put their heads into sand and don't want to hear, don't want to know, just it's better, like their safety. It feels like probably unsafe for them to do something real. So, and still, before the election, before Trump came in office, I myself was working, like we are working behind the scene with things that you don't have any idea. But that he would be elected before, because what was the option? It was Hillary or Jeb Bush. All of them were like the worst Illuminati puppets.
Right.
So it was the option we had then, that Trump will be elected, and then we can work further. He is like less bad than he will.
Well, don't you think this is how I know many people are looking at this? Certainly, there's more recognition of what is besetting us with the current CEO, but it's only because there has to be some broadening recognition when so many people are realizing something's terribly wrong.
Yeah.
So to put somebody in place that is addressing concerns is making people, or at least creating the illusion that he's there to change things, when in fact there of course has never been any discussion about the overhead aerial chemtrailing programs, the required vaccinations now in California and elsewhere. There has been no conversation, nothing to prevent Big Pharma from continuing to kill us. And Trump is behind building more wastewater treatment plants and recycling water through desalinization, which is meaning he is promoting the idea that we're running out of water, and we're not. Water is a renewable, and we can't agree to drink treated wastewater. It's poison. It's another kill.
Yeah.
And desalinization is going to create so much sludge. They're not going to know what to do with the poisons. Oh, well, yes, they will. They'll use it as fertilizers throughout our declining farmlands, and we're just being toppled. And when Trump came out here to the Central Valley in California, promising the ranchers more access to water, that access was underpinning the idea of creating more wastewater treatment plants. Again, the processing of fecal material, urine, and pharmaceuticals with contaminants of now greater emerging concern that are not taken out of the treatment plants. In fact, one of the treatment plants here in Madera, a city called Madera in California, Madera, is disintegrating. The treatment plant that holds the vats of human waste and pharmaceuticals is deteriorating. The concrete is being eaten away down to the rebar. And the city council met a few months ago saying we're not a city if we don't have a wastewater treatment plant. And so what we have is also, I'd like to ask you this question too, Alexandra, because I know we've talked about this before. And quite frankly, people are not aware that, as I said earlier, solar and wind is being replaced. And solar and wind is not only being replaced by weapons in space to direct lasers and energy to us, but also the World Bank documents tell us that geothermal, the use of geysers along the Ring of Fire, is going to be exploited for the use of creating more electricity as well. And we have here in Northern California the largest geyser geothermal operation in the world. Now, that's only 45 miles from Bohemian Grove. And I wondered through the years why we were having Department of Energy heads come to some of the meetings here in Northern California. It never made sense to me, but now I realize they're sitting on the world's largest geothermal operation that Rothschild started up, PG&E. And PG&E and Rothschild were complicit with the drilling, the borehole drilling on the big island of Hawaii with that Puna, P-U-N-A, geothermal plant, which started that eruption. And here in Northern California, about 1 hour from where I live, in the hills, we can see the plumes when the atmospheric conditions are right.
Wow.
From the escaping vapor. They have installed a 40-mile pipe from the wastewater treatment center in Santa Rosa, which is New World Order on steroids, from Santa Rosa here in Northern California that took a big hit in housing during the fires. There's a 40-mile pipe with booster pumps that's pumping up this wastewater, poop, urine, and pharmaceuticals and more. Fluoride, everything gets in this wastewater. They're fracking the boreholes on this on the top of this mountain, which is creating more vapor so they can harness and sell more electricity. But the hydrogen sulfide that is also being created is deadly.
Yeah.
And we went on a tour of this plant, and it's on stopthecrime.net. And I think I named it Geysers Geothermal Operation, something along that line. I would recommend everybody go to stopthecrime.net, go on that tour with us. It took us months to get this tour. And while it is a long video, we set it up in advance in explaining about the wastewater treatment plant. And we're on the ground filming how the wastewater treatment plant is being piped, and we show the mountains in the distance, etc. And interestingly enough, we filmed that about 24 hours or so before the fires burned up the town of Paradise and other surrounding communities in Butte County. So we were commenting while we were filming that about the much higher degree of chemtrailing that day. And you'll see us talking about that as we are showing and talking about this geothermal operation. So are you hearing, Alexandra, that they're planning to use the Ring of Fire to create more volcanic activity as well as more earthquakes? Because we know that creating these types of enormous events is just high on their list. Are you hearing about earthquakes and other aspects?
I haven't heard anything specific, but it's very logical that they will want to do it. But I haven't heard anything specific anywhere.
Okay, would you keep your ears alert to that? Because we're certainly hearing that we're going to have earthquakes here. And in fact, in one of the water manuals that I recently picked up, it's about 2 inches thick. I was looking through it, and they were saying here in California, it's going to be up to the water regulators to come up with a 50% reduction in water distribution. And they have to be prepared for being offline and having some potential potable water elsewhere because of disasters such as earthquakes, etc., where the water infrastructure will be compromised. So we know that this is what is going to happen. We're going to be cut off from water. It's going to be blamed on climate change. They're drying us up on the surface, moving water and moisture around and dumping it in other places. And we can feel the intensity in the atmosphere here in California. And in fact, many of you may have heard me talk about the Burnham Up list that CAL FIRE put up. And I would highly recommend that everyone understand your climate action plans don't exclude you from this discussion that you hear me having about California in specific, because you're in the crosshairs with all of this kind of weaponization and attack as well. And people keep thinking, oh, poor California, too bad. You know, I'm glad I'm not in California. I'm going to move elsewhere. Well, I can only tell you, look at your climate action plan, read it. I was looking at one in North Dakota recently, and it talked about increased vector, increased West Nile virus diseases, expanding Lyme disease, the inadequate water supply, power outages. This is in Bedford, North Dakota. You can look at this climate action plan. Now you can look at your climate action plan too. And I pulled the climate action plan from Butte County here in Northern California, where they took out the town of Paradise. And I was reading it, and it did talk about, unless they reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and their CO2, that they would experience floods, reduced water supply, fires. And of course, they had their fire. But then not far from where they talked about the consequences of not reducing those aspects of, you know, driving cars, not traveling, reducing all transportation that is outside the city boundary, anything that is beyond riding a bike. And then it said, it won't matter what you do to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. The weather is too exacerbated now. In other words, it's going to happen. And this is really one of the first plans that, well, I shouldn't say that, but it's the first plan that stated that so succinctly. Other plans allude to, well, climate change is beyond our ability to have much of an impact, but this really says it unequivocally. And when I went back and I was going over this plan on different radio interviews that I was giving, and then all of a sudden on the Butte County website, the plan wasn't there. And I couldn't find it. So I called the planning department up there, which also had a wrong phone number. on the website for the planning department of Butte County in California. They've since corrected it because I told them. But on the website, after the fires, they had a wrong phone number that took me to a call center in Florida to talk to me about a Caribbean cruise.
Oh.
Wow.
And so I called them up and I said, what on earth? Your head planner has a phone number that connects to a survey and a Caribbean cruise, and the link to your climate action plan doesn't work anymore.
Wow.
Well, they presumably put that back up. So I can only tell you, as what Alexandra is saying with the false flags, these climate action plans are your advance warning of plans in action. And they're in disguise, and your cities have approved them because they're all incorporated. And the next plan is to roll out, and I will tell you this is horrifying. And Alexandra, this is unbelievable. I forget who to give credit to, but someone found, and this is extremely important in my opinion, someone found in British Columbia, in Canada, that they are planning to implement an emergency on climate change, a state of emergency on climate change.
Wow.
So imagine if that occurs, what that will mean is the fast rollout and requirement of all retrofitting. That is all part of the new green energy jobs, are to hire people to come into our homes and require that we change out appliances to wireless, that we have, that also does include everything that would attach to your wireless water meter, which they now have wireless kitchen faucets. You've probably heard me say that, along with wireless shower faucets. We're looking at the average cost now, which would also include the requirement of solar, to be around $20,000 for every home to retrofit. We're talking about new windows. I hope all of you have signed on to stopthecrime.net. You've been getting our email blast outs because we recently informed everybody about the new green low E energy windows that are part of the new code upgrade requirements supported by the Department of Energy. Again, another rogue aspect of the takedown of this country, the Department of Energy with the LED lights, etc. But the new, or I shouldn't say new, the low E energy windows for our homes cause fires. And it is unbelievable. You can type that in your search engine, low E energy windows and fires, and it will be a cascading warnings throughout the country and the world, and how long this has been going on. There's absolutely no information through these companies that supply this that will warn anybody about this. So if any of you want to spend time standing in front of a podium at your local city council meeting where they don't listen to you, say something important. Say it loud and clear and get it on record that the low E energy windows cause fires, and download the email blast that we have on stopthecrime.net, because it will give you the verbiage and the discussion of how to say it, because we had first-hand experience with realizing that they start fires, because someone here in Northern California that lost their home moved in a newly built home, and right next door to where they had just moved in after having been burned out, in the unoccupied model home right next to them, a fire started right before Thanksgiving of 2018. Had they not been home, the house would have burned down, because just even because they were there, they used garden hoses, they called the fire department. By the time the fire department arrived and had to tear off wood siding to the house, the flames had already gotten under the crawl space under the house. Wow. And it's because the low E energy windows concave when the sun hits them in the right angle, and it magnifies, it reflects this heat that ignites. And you will see it burns your neighbor. It can burn your neighbor's car up if that's where the heat beam is. It can burn, in this instance, It burnt was the back wooden fence was on fire, the mulch was on fire, and the flames were already lapping up the support beams of the deck and going under the house. And luckily they were able to get this out. But at the time, they did not know it was caused by the windows. The fire department said, "Oh, this is a freak of nature," because no one understood what happened. It was only about 2 weeks or so later that they saw these brown, blackish evidence of a fire. And that's when they discovered it was the low E energy windows. Now,